What's good, YouTube? It's your boy Sly sliding on that timeline. Oh, and today we got why flawed abilities are more interesting by Pint is here. Now, as an avid anime watcher, comic nerd, shoot, I be reading manga. I would put y'all on game, but I can't. I gotta give y'all the sauce once. Nah, it's probably better I give y'all the sauce now, so like my methods don't get leaked. But it's not illegal, so it's like I'd rather give y'all the sauce from more up there, so more people know ball. You feel me? But I be reading my manga on my app and things of that nature, and I'm working on my own like series. So I've been thinking about it since I was like legit. So the talk about like power systems and abilities is always interesting, and I'm just a nerd in general. I'm a physics major, so I thought it'd be interesting to see Pint is here, his take on why flawed abilities are more interesting. Without further ado, see what my brother has to say.
Alright, let me ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
At what point in a story are the protagonist's abilities at their most interesting?
First, great question. Second, great animation, great detail to video. These are highly produced vids. Off this alone, I believe this would be a high production vid. We got the blur in the back. We got the line filling up as he's asking the question. That's peak. When is the protagonist's abilities at its most interesting? Oh, I guess like before the climax.
At what point in a story are the protagonist's abilities at their most interesting?
Like I would assume during like the rising action, or you could say the climax. I can also hear the final battle, but like for me, narratively creating a story you haven't introduced earlier as part of the setting, like briefly, and then like during that rising action, I would say it's like latter half rising action, beginning climax, because there's where like all of the things are being kind of revealed, so you'd want that to be revealed as well. I'd say at the very least.
If you take a moment to really think about it, the vast majority of you will probably come to the same conclusion that it's at the tail end of the series. And I completely understand that viewpoint. By the end of the story, the protagonist has likely reached the pinnacle of their strength, perfecting every skill they've picked up since the beginning. And
I mean, I get that. A lot of people towards the end will have them like not amped, but yeah, I get it. You know, they have everything under their arsenal now. But to me, I think well, the way he phrased the question, I'm thinking interesting. I would say like that ending of rising action to early climax, because that's where it goes from you think this to now knowing more about it is true and seeing them work on it. That's where I find it more interesting, because that's when they're working on it and you're still speculating. Oh snap! What's the end goal here? How far can they take this? But if we're talking about just in spectacle, how much of a spectacle it is, how like flashy it is, I think towards the end would be the answer everyone comes to for sure.
And often unlocking some kind of god tier endgame power that ends up defining the character in all future power scaling debates. And for the most part, I completely agree with this perspective. There's definitely something satisfying about seeing a protagonist you've grown attached to fully master their abilities. But even so, I've always had a soft spot for a different period in their growth. Right around, say, the 30% mark of the story.
Okay.
When they...
He's saying 30%. That's the rising action. Alonzo was like my first take on it. Because the rising action is like, well, that's like end setting early rising action. So we're on two opposite sides of the spectrum based off how I saw his question.
They've unlocked their long-term abilities, but they're still rough around the edges. Unpolished, learning. Because to a large degree, I believe there is a kind of beauty in imperfect abilities.
See, we had the same take on that though. Like not knowing where it's gonna go.
That allows writers to create more engaging scenarios and battles than perfect abilities allow. So what is it that makes these flawed, incomplete powers so interesting? How do great writers portray the early stages of a character's growth in a way that's compelling? And what are some standout examples of this being done well? That's what we'll be exploring in today's video. So stick around, you might just learn something important.
For sure.
So why do I enjoy the protagonist's imperfect abilities more than their fully realized endgame version? Well, it all comes down to one thing: flaws. When designing an ability, there's a sort of trifecta of flaws that a writer should consider. Each element adds depth, and together, they shape
Weakness, drawbacks, limitations. For sure, I would say, taking it to me and what I'm trying to create, I think limitations to me, as like a creator, my artistic thought process, limitations come, second creation comes from me. It's like once you create it, you immediately draw that line. What is the limit of this? And then you fill up that box of like what you just created and its limit, because you have to define a limit to define what it is. You know, you fill that all the way up, and then obviously then you have like exceptions to it. And while you're filling up that limitations, then you have like your weaknesses. Like, okay, its limits are this. That means it's weak to this, and this is where you have to go to counter this type of thing. Drawbacks for my like power system, I'm not gonna lie, I haven't really thought about that. Limitations I have, weaknesses I have, and I have ways for like a character to overcome that. And then once that happens, there really is no, well, there still is weakness, but the limitations are much less severe, I'd say.
Shape how the ability interacts with the story. The first of these is the weakness, and is actually the least important of the three.
Okay.
Weaknesses are what counter the ability. It's useful to have a few in mind when crafting powers. Some writers go for hard counters, like an ability that becomes completely useless in the light, while others opt for a more indirect weakness, like situational disadvantages. But overall, this is the most superficial layer. The next
I think I have situational disadvantages to my power system.
trifecta is the limitations of the ability. These refer to the upper bounds of what the ability can actually achieve, the limits of its destructive power, the maximum output the user can reach, or the points where the character can't push it further.
Yeah, see, my limits tend to be like, on average, this is its peak. There's ways around those limitations. Though obviously, like I said, once you color in the creation to limitations part, you then shade in, oh, these are some of the outliers. So those exist.
It defines the ceiling of their potential, at least for now. And then there's the drawback, which I believe is the most important and interesting piece of this trifecta.
Okay, that means I'm cooked. I don't think my power system has drawbacks. Well, no, it definitely, now that I think about it, it 100% does have drawbacks. Just not, okay, it does have drawbacks. It's like how devil fruits, you can't swim. And devil fruits, like, weakness is hockey. Or I guess you could say water as well, but I would say its drawback is water. You can't swim at all. But like a weakness would be hockey. You can counteract someone's devil fruit. Like you can touch them, but like they still might be able to cook you. You feel me? Or like light and dark, or like Ace versus Blackbeard, fire with darkness. Okay, so my ability does have drawbacks. Yeah, for sure. Okay, because he doesn't see limitations as like, this is as far as it. No, he did say that's like how far you can push it. I was just thinking limitations like immediately going, this is where we at, this is where we can go. He's seen it more in the type timing of like that's your limit. So when he's saying drawbacks, he's really talking about like what I was thinking about when I said limitations.
Drawbacks are consequences that directly punish the user for misusing or overusing their powers. Think of a character who burns themselves by pushing their fire abilities too far, or someone who suffers painful recoil from pushing their body beyond its limits. These drawbacks ground the power in risk and consequence, and that makes them fascinating. And therein lies the main issue with polished endgame abilities. Writers often completely erase this entire trifecta. As characters grow stronger, abilities tend to lose their limitations. What once had a strict boundary now feels limitless. Counters become irrelevant because the power is so versatile it can adapt to anything. And worst of all, the drawbacks, the essential elements of tension, are dropped altogether.
So my thing with mine is, I agree. First off, let's react to what he's saying. I think this is true. A lot of times that end game, I think a great example of that not being the case necessarily is Gear 5 Luffy. But we know this isn't his final form. This isn't his peak. He said it's his peak, but it's not like his actual peak, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. His power obviously has to improve for the story to go how it looks like it's where it's heading. But yeah, traditionally, that final form is like limitations removed. But for me, it's like there is no, like with this power, it's all about mastery. So it's like you have or you don't have, and then there's like that steep learning curve. And then once you have that mastery, it's like what you can do expands so much. But there is no like, oh, these limitations that exist no longer exist. Like I get it to a point where the limitations become less so, but the concept that the limitation is still 100% there, which is why you have to use this like kind of workaround to be a little more efficient.
And why is this a problem? Well, because you lose tension. You lose the sense of risk, of vulnerability, of creative problem solving. Flawed abilities act like puzzles. The protagonist has to think, adapt, and sometimes even suffer to make them work.
At Spectrum, we believe every day unlocks unlimited possibilities. Spectrum.
Shout out to Spectrum though. I'm using them right now.
Adds a layer of complexity to the writing, and when it's gone, something vital is lost. And no part of storytelling makes this more obvious than with transformations. Only blah 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 percent, whatever. Okay, let's make a deal. If this number goes up to 4% by my next video, I will not make one of these subscriber breaks for the next 3. Okay? Deal. Back to
we can wait to the end and talk about
the video. To be honest, I've never really loved transformations as abilities. Most of the time, instead of offering some unique new power or creative twist, they usually serve as a glorified stat boost. The character moves faster, the character hits harder, the character tanks more damage, and that's it. Just look at Ichigo's perfected Hollow Mask as one example. It's just a flat boost to his physical abilities. Sure, his attacks are black now or whatever, whoa, cool, but there's nothing really interesting going on besides him being stronger. Now compare these so-called complete transformations to the ones displayed earlier on in the series, and it becomes clear how much more compelling these early transformations were. One aspect that makes these early transformations so much better is the introduction of the Berserk state, where the character can only tap into their power while enraged or under extreme stress.
This is peak. I talk about this so much with my narrative as well. I mess with that. This is very common. It reminds me of like the sleep state Zenitsu. That flaw is a lot more interesting, entertaining, I'd say, to like watch and support for sure.
Losing control of themselves while doing so. And I have to say, I absolutely love these. Just take a look at Naruto's version 2 cloak. He can only access this form when emotionally overwhelmed, but the power increase is insane. It's destructive, raw, and comes with serious consequences. Unlike the perfected chakra cloak, which has almost no drawbacks, version 2 carries a real sense of urgency. The red cloak is literally formed by his blood boiling, cutting down his lifespan and destroying his cells. So even though we know Naruto gains the power to turn the tide of battle, we're still stressed watching it, wondering how he'll manage the aftermath. Or take Ichigo's earlier version of the Hollow Mask.
Yeah.
Zangetsu would only step in when Ichigo was desperate.
That was so peak when like he was fighting Byakuya, the mask came on, and then he like threw it off. I was like, hey, watch out. I'm trying to lock in.
And even then, there was a constant threat of his inner hollow taking control. Every single time Ichigo was forced to use this form, it represented a failure of his ideals, having to borrow strength from the more primal version of himself, introducing an internal and deeper power struggle. These forms are so great because they introduce a second layer of tension. It's no longer just about winning the fight, it's also about managing the transformation itself. The protagonist is walking a tightrope, balancing risk with power and control. The limitation is that they can only access the form under extreme stress, and the drawback is that when they do, no one around them, not even themselves, is truly safe. But if you want an example of an early series transformation without the inner struggle dynamic, look no further than Kaioken. If you were to ask me what my favorite Dragon Ball transformation was, well, I'd have to go with the most iconic choice and say Super Saiyan. But don't get it twisted, Kaioken is right there behind it. Kaioken is a simple yet effective transformation that perfectly balances risk and reward, allowing the users to tap into increasingly higher multiplications of power at the cost of damaging their body. What I especially love about this transformation is how variable and dynamic it is. Goku can decide how far to push it moment to moment, sometimes dipping into higher multipliers extremely briefly to minimize damage, while generally maintaining a safer range. That element of choice and strategy is what makes it way more engaging.
Yeah, and that goes for, as a power system, that goes for the fight, and it also goes for the narrative, because briefly in that moment, the stakes are increased. But not only are the stakes increased, it finally showcases, puts on display that character's ability to handle combat versus just like these people are punching and kicking.
And basic transformations that just hand out stat boosts with no real consequences. Now for the real reason I made this video. To rant about how One For All was more interesting in the first 2 seasons than in the entire rest of the show. I'm just kidding. Kind of. Super strength is one of the most overused powers in all of fiction. Superman, Spider-Man. At this point, literally every shonen power system has it bundled in like it's part of a starter kit.
Hey, you feel like you see that respect they put in there? You see that respect they put in there to Gurren Lagann? Number 2, power friendship, peak. That in Fairy Tail, peak. We got absent, super important Dash's ancestor that I can name most anime up here, I'd say. I think bottom right, Fullmetal Alchemist. We got Bleach, Inuyasha, Fairy Tail. Bottom left, Yu Yu. Above bottom left, Hunter x Hunter. I forgot I have a mouse. Yu-Gi-Oh, Naruto, GL, Rurouni Kenshin, Bobo no Bobo. I'm gonna have to assume Dragon Ball. Sword Art Online, One Piece, JoJo, Fairy Tail, Dragon Ball. Piccolo counts for this trope as well. Yu Yu, Bleach, Naruto, want to dapping each other up. And that's all. That's all.
But the early version of One For All, that was one of the most unique takes on super strength I had ever seen, and that's all because of its ridiculous drawback. Hirokoshi nailed the raw impact of the ability by making it physically destructive, not just to the environment, but to the user themselves. When Deku used One For All early on, his limbs literally shattered. And it's not just that. The wind howled and the air physically bent with every single punch. We as the audience didn't need to be told that One For All was strong. We could see it for ourselves. Remember when All Might literally changed the weather with a single punch? That's how you sell power. But what really sold One For All as special to me was the toll it took, the drawback. Seeing Deku burn through his own limbs like they're bullets in a chamber, shattering fingers, breaking arms, using already broken limbs to keep fighting, it's one of the sickest dynamics I've seen come out of a power system. Sure, he inevitably had to evolve past this level of self-destruction, but for me, that broken version of One For All, the version that majorly cost him something, is more interesting than any of the 6 quirks they later slapped onto him. And one of my favorite tropes to come out of this is when a character manages to use their abilities' drawbacks to their advantage. You don't get to see those kinds of scenarios with perfect abilities. Like with solo leveling, every single time an opponent tries to poison Jinwoo, nothing fucking happens because he's completely immune and his ability has no drawbacks nor limitations. I just roll my eyes because of how boring that is. Now compare that to Deku deliberately breaking his own fingers with One For All to break out of Shinso's brainwashing, and you can instantly tell which of these two scenarios is more interesting to me. But in my opinion, no one puts their flawed ability to the use better than Yuji Itadori. For most of Jujutsu Kaisen, Yuji is technically powerless. Compared to other sorcerers, he doesn't have a flashy curse technique. What he does have is inhuman super strength and dysfunctional cursed energy control, which again sounds basic, but luckily, Gege knew how to take a flaw and turn it into a feature. Enter Divergent Fist.
Workplace is shutting down, but no worries, connect teams all in one.
Unsponsored. Talk to me.
At first glance, it's not even a real technique. Rather, it's an unfortunate side effect of Yuji being unable to sync his cursed energy with his punches properly. But because of this flaw, Yuji's attacks gain a delayed second impact. It's much weaker than a perfectly timed curse-infused punch, but if used properly, it does manage to catch opponents off guard. And that trade-off is what makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Yuji is forced to fight with this handicap, but he does manage to use it to his advantage.
Yeah, I think that is the peak. That is the peak of writing where everything is tied together to some extent to where drawbacks become strengths. Like an example would be the blind swordsman. I know it's a trope now, but I'm sure the first person to ever see a blind swordsman be like that, or like Toph in Avatar. I think this is a really great example. She's blind, but her earthbending was better because she learned the seismic sense. I was able to sense every little, microscopic thing, and without seismic sense, she wouldn't have been able to learn how to metal bend. Even if she was an equally good earthbender, because there are earthbenders who, at the time before she came up with metal bending, you would be like, okay, they're about the same skill level as her, like Boomy, who could not have fathomed metal bending. So when those weaknesses / drawbacks become important ladders for a character to climb in their journey to mastery, it shows you how much depth is behind the power system, for sure.
Again and again, Divergent Fist is capable of messing with opponents' timing and opening up opportunities. And even after Yuji learns how to properly infuse his strikes, he still falls back on it when the timing is right. Because even a flawed tool can be turned into a deadly weapon if used properly. So what is the point I'm trying to make? Well, it's simple. Flawed abilities are interesting because they force creativity. They demand a certain kind of growth, not just in raw power, but in how a character thinks.
Yeah.
And that struggle, that tension, that give and take, that's where some of the most compelling storytelling happens. When abilities are too clean, too perfect, too convenient, they stop being tools for character development and just become bait for flashy animation sequences or Sakuga compilations. But when they're unpredictable, risky, or dangerous to the user, that's when characters rise above their limits, not just by overpowering the enemy, but also by outsmarting their own flaws. So yeah, no one is denying the fact that endgame power-ups are cool. Everyone loves seeing a protagonist at their peak, but I'll always have a soft spot for that messy middle stage, where the protagonist is still figuring it out.
See how you call it middle stage? I'm just saying, if you got, what is it, like the setting, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, middle stage, the climax, and that 30%, with the rising action. I'm saying,
where every fight feels like a gamble, and when victory really and truly means something. Because it's those moments of hopeful desperation that make a story compelling in the first place. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, let me know what your favorite flawed ability in fiction is in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe,
That was an excellent video by Pintus here. We're definitely gonna be subscribing. You know, those of you watching, make sure you subscribe as well. Feel me? Oh, my mouse is tweaking. Hold on, let's refresh. That's how much we die about this. Subscribing and liking. Oh, you giving me an ad
Have you
off
ever
the
heard
refresh?
of 75 Hard? You know, the trendy social media
Are
challenge.
you serious right now? Subscribe to my boy. Like. Skip. Pause. Gotta get my watch time back. Hold on. Appreciate y'all for tapping in to this vid. My pint is here. And yeah, man. Make sure y'all subscribe. Make sure y'all got y'all noties on. Y'all know YouTube a little weird when it comes to that. Make sure y'all like. And I appreciate y'all for tuning into another reaction. As always, make sure you do at least 3 good deeds. Make sure you're drinking your water, eating the proper calories you need to consume. You feel me? Sometimes we don't need to just have maintenance. Sometimes we gotta be in surplus. Sometimes we gotta be in a little deficit, man. At the end of the day, it's a roller coaster that we all gotta ride, and we find our own pace to how we move. As always, appreciate y'all for sticking through till the end. Those of you who watch halfway, still appreciate it. Great for the community, great for engagement. And yeah, that's it. Peace.